Hi, this is Steve with Thresher Media Group. Welcome to When You're Ready to Listen. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the truth about God, things you may not have understood, may not have been taught, or quite frankly, had a very hard time believing. And since our entire relationship with God rests on believing, it is important we learn how to separate the truth from the many lies and fictions that abound within the religion of Christianity. So when you're ready to listen, tune in and discover a pathway to freedom, encouragement, life, and hope. Episode 82, Revelation 11, verse 1, part 4, and verse 2. In our last podcast, we discussed the end times fiction, which has everyone looking for a third Jewish temple to be built, a temple of God. Even though preparations have been made by those in Israel, we dismantled this fiction through examining the errant way those who teach this fiction completely ignore the code, and thereby completely ignore how the Spirit addressed this issue. Sadly, the common biblical translations are super misleading and unfortunately have led to many fictions. With that said, those who teach these fictions, well, they should know better. The sanctuary, the naos, as referred to exclusively in the Revelation narrative, is a very real structure. But it is a spiritual and not a physical structure. It refers to the holy place in the overall household of God, the place that is reserved for the priests of God, the chosen ones. And with the measurement of the sanctuary, we will find that God makes another division that shocks us and rocks us to the core. With that said, let's pick up with the second measurement within the measurement of the altar. Part 2, the altar of incense. Interestingly, John is also commanded to measure the altar. And since he is commanded to measure the sanctuary and those who are now worshiping in it, it's most likely that this is a reference to the golden altar of incense, which was placed right in front of the curtain that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies. I've included an illustration in the transcript, a picture of the sanctuary, for the placement of the altar of incense. According to the Codex, there was to be a perpetual burning of incense on this altar throughout all generations. The altar was sanctified by sacrificial blood of the sin offering, and it was considered most holy to Yahweh. The reason it was so precious to God is because according to what we learned in Revelation 8, the golden altar of incense and the four horns of the altar are tied directly to the prayers of God's people, the prayers of the saints, or literally, the prayers of the holy ones, and the authority of those prayers, imaged in the horns of the altar, that is established on the altar through the prayers that rise up before the throne of Yahweh. Why the altar? This image begs the question, why did God specifically ask for the altar to be measured? But he did not ask for the lampstand, nor the table of showbread, which held the bread of the presence, literally, the bread of the face, to be measured. After all, the table was also in the sanctuary, directly across from the lampstand. Why not the lampstand or the table? Perhaps these images have been accounted for already. For instance, the image of the lampstand is essentially the basis for measurement. The reeds through which oil flows and which the light of the world shines is captured in the image of the two witnesses, bearing the prophetic testimony to the world. And with regard to the table of showbread, which held the 12 loaves representing the 12 tribes of Israel, perhaps this was previously measured when the 144,000, identified by that very funky list of 12 tribes of Israel, which included multiple references to Gentiles, were set apart and sealed with Yahweh's signet, that great multitude which no one could count from every nation, and all tribes and peoples and tongues, having been standing before the throne and before the Lamb, having chosen to be clothed in white robes and palm branches in their hands. Other than the lampstand and the table of presence, there were no other items in the holy place of the sanctuary, just in the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was placed on the other side of the curtain that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies within the sanctuary. And the Ark of the Covenant will be addressed in 11:19, completing the inclusion of everything within the sanctuary of God. This is going to sting, the altar measurement. As we previously stated, one does not go and measure something unless there is a reason to cause a separation or to define something. For example, the boundary of a parcel of property, the size of a room, a personal possession, or something similar. One measures for ownership and clarity purposes. With the measurement of the altar of incense, the Spirit is letting us know that from this time forth, the only prayers that He will hear will be the prayers which come forth from the altar that is located in the sanctuary. These will be the prayers of His priests who are now worshiping in the sanctuary, which is a picture of the famed two witnesses. In 11:6, we will uncover the types of prayers that will be lifted up to Him by the two witnesses, as well as the effectiveness of those prayers. We will find that what they let loose on the earth is nothing short of terrifying. But at that time, when all hell breaks loose and people are scrambling for help and they cry out to God, their prayers will not be heard. With the blowing of the seventh trumpet, it's too late. Prayer time is over for those who are not now worshiping in the sanctuary. Remember, this measurement is a separation, a calling. The time is up and the time is now. Part 3. Those now worshiping in it. By way of background, the sanctuary was a unique place, but it was not a highly frequented place, for only the priests were permitted to enter the sanctuary. The Levitical priests were on a rotation schedule and were responsible for just a few things in the sanctuary. Morning and night, they tended to the lampstand to ensure it had enough oil. The wicks were trimmed and so on to make certain the lampstand remained perpetually lit. The priests would also offer up incense on the altar each morning and evening. They replaced the bread of the table of presence every Sabbath day. And once a year, the high priest entered in behind the veil into the Holy of Holies to sprinkle blood on the mercy seat, which covered the Ark of the Covenant. So at any given time, only a few of the priests would actually be physically present, worshiping in the sanctuary. The rest who were on duty were engaged in the temple at large, performing and overseeing sacrifices and ministering to the people. And those who were not on duty were home taking care of personal, family, and business matters. This measurement, however, is specifically of those who are on duty and are even now worshiping in the sanctuary. This measurement does not, therefore, include those who are ministering in the temple at large, overseeing the sacrifices of the masses, nor does it include those who are off duty. This is really going to sting. The deepest calling. The implication is that there are priests who are not now worshiping the sanctuary and who prefer to be overseeing sacrifices of the peoples in the temple at large, or who are enjoying their days off. Either way, they will not be measured off as belonging to God. This is beyond scary. God is making a division, a separation between those who are His priests, yes, a division among the chosen. We will get to the separation God makes between the chosen and the called and His command about what not to measure. But first, there is a calling amongst those identified as priests, whose primary duty is to the sanctuary. This is terribly hard, both intellectually and emotionally. We have been talking so long about the division between the called and the chosen, which for the most part tends to make both intellectual and emotional sense, because the called, though converted by God, born again, never dug down deep in their soul and chose to be a little child dependent upon Yahweh for all things, all the time. And as Jesus clearly and unequivocally stated, those who do not make this choice may not inherit the kingdom of heaven. In fact, the parallel passage in Mark and Luke, the Spirit uses a double negative. They may not no way enter therein. Hence, many are called, but few chosen. But the division does not stop there. Shockingly, a similar judgment or division is made in and amongst the few, amongst the chosen of God. This is super disturbing. However, it should not shake our nerves nor rattle our brains, for it is entirely consistent with what Jesus said in every single letter to the 7 churches. All His promises, without exception, were made to those who are now overcoming and now believing. After all, faith is a now thing. And if we are those who are now having ears to hear what the Spirit now says to the churches, we would have understood and accepted this truth, hard though it may be. The called and chosen and faithful. This brings us to a third division, a perfect division, that is explained to us in a scene from Revelation 17, verse 14. In that passage, we are told that the Lamb, Jesus, will overcome the beast and the kingdom of the beast, image in the 7 heads and 10 horns of the beast, because he, Jesus, is the Lord of lords and King of kings. In other words, Jesus is supreme over all the spiritual and physical rulers of the world. Then we get to a statement about his return. And those with him, called and chosen and faithful. There are 3 adjectives that describe those who are with him. And these descriptions are additive: called and chosen and faithful. Everyone who is born again is called into the household of God. Everyone who digs down deep in their soul and chooses to become a little child dependent upon Yahweh exercises their authority to become a child of God. And they are the chosen of God, and they minister as priests of God. They have the right to serve in the sanctuary of God. But those who remain dependent upon Yahweh for everything, refusing to believe any religious decree that militates against them living in unrestrained freedom, those who endure to the end despite their intense suffering and persecutions, those who still are now overcoming and now have the oil of the Spirit flowing through their reeds, so to speak, are the faithful. They are known by a compounding of adjectives. They are called and chosen and faithful. They are those who are now worshiping in the sanctuary and are now choosing to come out of the great tribulation. And those with him, called and chosen and faithful. So we must ask, who is it that is with him? According to Revelation 22:12, his reward is with him. So we must ask, who is his reward? Don't you love the way the Spirit just spreads this stuff out? Behold, Yahweh is proclaimed to the end of the earth. Say to the daughter of Zion, lo, your salvation comes. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense or payment before him. And they will call them the holy people, the redeemed of Yahweh, and you will be called sought out, a city not forsaken. The redeemed, the holy people are his reward. These are those who are with him wherever he goes, including at his second coming. According to Revelation 14, these are those who have been caused to be redeeming from the earth. The 144,000 who have been caused to be redeemed from among men as first fruits to God and to the Lamb. They are now following the Lamb wherever he now goes, and they are now blameless. Hence the Spirit said, and those with him, called and chosen and faithful. For the Lord himself will choose to descend from heaven with a shout, and with the voice of the archangel, and with the trumpet of God, and the dead in Christ will choose to rise first. Then we who are now living and now caused to be remaining will be caused to be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will always choose to be with the Lord. After the resurrection of the dead and the rapture of those now living, those who meet Jesus in the air will henceforth, yes, I just said henceforth, always be with him. In the book of Hebrews, the Spirit makes the point that because Jesus was willing to sacrifice in order to bring many sons to glory, the reward the Father gave him were sons, brethren, or children, and of them he is not ashamed. Hence, his reward is with him, the faithful. Thus, of those who have been chosen, only those who are faithful, who are now overcoming, who are now believing, who are now worshiping in the sanctuary, will be measured. The rest of those who were chosen will not be measured. 1 Peter 4:17 through 19. For the time for judgment must first choose to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who are not now obeying the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is now caused to be saved, what will choose to become of the godless man and the sinner? And what is the gospel of God that we are to now be obeying? That all things must be by grace through faith. It is for this reason of judgment within the household of God that the Spirit was super intense in the book of Hebrews to warn believers that they must continue in their belief and not fall away into unbelief. This makes sense given that faith is always a now thing. Faith is not something from our past, not something we had, not something we once exercised. After speaking of how great Jesus is and how he is far superior to the angels, In the book of Hebrews, the Spirit said, "For this reason, how great Jesus is, we now must pay much closer attention to the things that have been caused to be hearing, so that we may not be caused to drift away from it. For if the word being caused to be speaking through angels proved unalterable, and every transgression and disobedience received a just penalty, how will we choose to escape if we have been neglecting so great a salvation? Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant, for a testimony of those things which were to be caused to be speaking later. But Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we now are, if we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope. You are commanded to now take care, brethren, that there choose to be in any one of you an evil, unbelieving heart that falls away from the living God. But now encourage one another day after day, as long as it is still cause to now be called today, so that none of you may be caused to be hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we may hold fast the beginning of our assurance firm until the end. While it is now said, today, if you should hear his voice, you should not harden your hearts as in the provocation. For who provoked him when they had been hearing? Indeed, did it not all those who had been coming out of Egypt led by Moses? And with whom was he angry for 40 years? Was it not with those who had been sinning, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not choose to enter his rest? But to those who were not believing. So now we see that they were not able to enter because of unbelief. Therefore, let us be caused to fear, if, while a promise is now caused to be remaining to enter his rest, any one of you may now seem to have come short of it. For the good news now having been caused to be preaching to us, exactly as unto them. But the word they heard did not profit them, because it was not having been caused to be united by faith in those who had been hearing. For we who have been believing now choose to enter that rest, just as he said, as I swore in my wrath, they shall not choose to enter my rest, although his works have been caused to be finishing from the foundation of the world. So there now remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For the one who has been entering his rest has himself also rested from his works, as God did from his. Therefore, may we be diligent to enter that rest, so that no one will fall through following the same example of unbelief. These are harrowing passages, but the message is very clear. That choice to dig down deep in our souls and live like a child, dependent upon Yahweh for all things all the time, because we believe that he alone is our I am, our source of everything, is a choice in which we must now be enduring. The standard of measurement is of those who are now believing, not of those who at one time believed. Thus, faith is not just a now thing. Faith is always active. For we who have been believing now choose to enter that rest. And what is it that we have been caused to be hearing? What is the good news? That all things are by grace through faith, and not a result of works, so that no man should boast. Thus, as you have received Jesus, you are commanded to now walk in him by grace through faith. This is the reason why the Spirit asked, this is the only thing I now want to find out from you. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by hearing with faith? Are you now so foolish? Having chosen to begin by the Spirit, are you now being perfected or now choosing to be perfected by the flesh? Did you suffer so many things in vain, if indeed it was in vain? So then, does he who is now providing you with the Spirit and is now working miracles among you do it by the works of the law or by hearing with faith? You have been severed from Christ, you who are now seeking to be justified by law, any law. You have fallen from grace. Thus, those who are now worshiping in the sanctuary choose to let the Spirit help them stop being their own I am, as they choose to be that little child dependent upon Yahweh for all things, all the time. They let God teach them to stop striving to be good with God, or said another way, to reject the false Messiah and all his requirements for Christian worship and Christian living. And instead, they choose to now be believing that Yahweh Sidkenu alone is their righteousness, that he is the one who makes them his holy people, who are now blameless, and they choose to rest in this truth. Practically, and this is all a process, as they become more and more willing to let God cut and burn away all that stands in the way of his possessing their being. They are now stopping obsessing on sin, now stopping judging and condemning themselves and others for sin. They are now stopping shaming themselves and others for what they have done. They are now stopping manipulating others with religious guilt, duty, and obligation. They are now stopping living by the delusion of should have and could have and the next time I will. They are no longer obsessing on all that the religion tells them that they should do for God and for people in order to receive his blessings in this life. They are now learning to let God do his work in and through their lives only when he wants to do it. They are now letting go of the religious framework of their respective denominations and are now choosing to accept what the Spirit has said, how the Spirit said it, and are learning to accept why he said it that way. They are now believing that Yahweh Adonai is in control of every step of their lives, and like a little child, they are willing to be learning to trust him with every part of their lives. They have been willing to purchase from God gold, having been refined by fire, so that they may become rich, and white garments, so that they may clothe themselves, and that the shame of their nakedness will not be revealed, and eye salve to anoint their eyes so that they may see. They are now keeping his word and not denying his name. They are now persevering and enduring in believing. They are those who are now overcoming and who are now following the Lamb wherever he now goes. In some, they are simply now believing Jesus to be who he said he is, the Lord, our God Almighty. And it is for this reason that the measurement is that of the lampstand, the reed, or the bearers of oil, the vessels of light who have Jesus' life flowing in and through their own, bringing illumination everywhere they go. And because this reed is like a rod, we know that this measurement is exacting and true, dividing the visible church from the true church. Once God stakes his ownership and possession of those who are now worshiping in the sanctuary through this measurement of a reed that is like a rod, he communicates that everyone else who thought they should be in his measurement are left out. Revelation 11:2. You are commanded to leave out the court which is outside the sanctuary, and do not measure it. For it has been caused to be given to the collective of peoples, and they will tread the holy city for 42 months. Do not measure. John is specifically told not to measure the courts which are outside the naos, outside of the sanctuary, or the court of the priests. Referring back to the illustration, the areas that were not to be measured include the court of the males, the court of women, the court of the Gentiles, and all the associated porches and porticos. In this picture, as he has done so many times before, God is once again making a fixed distinction between those in the visible church and those who he deems to be his true church, his true worshipers. If those who are measured are the priests of God who are now worshiping his personal possession, the bondservants of Jesus Christ, the chosen of the chosen, then all those who are excluded from measurement are those who occupy the temple at large, those in the religion of Christianity who are very busy serving him with all their sacrifices, service, giving, dedication, worship, sincerity, intention, and so on, the collective which we address as the called. Now, just to be clear and to try to keep things sorted in our heads, we will expand our normal definition of the called to include those priests who had been chosen, but who are not now worshiping in the sanctuary, but are found in the temple at large, or who are simply off duty and taking care of their own personal interests in this life. The called come to the temple to be taught and to learn about God and to worship him and to learn how to be good Christians. And they work hard to overcome sin and to be good witnesses to the world by their pious lives. They are found doing their religious duty. After all, they are in the temple grounds, and they are not outside of the temple. Once again, Jude in Revelation targets those within the visible church with a message which separates those who stand only on the goodness of God from those who are trying very hard to be good for God. The called are not permitted to enter the sanctuary of the priest, where only the chosen of the chosen are found, those who are called and chosen and faithful. The called are not even measured because they do not belong. We have learned that the one who chooses to abide as a slave in the household of God, like Ishmael, who dwelt in the tents of Abraham, and who does not choose to be a little child dependent solely on Yahweh to be their portion or their provision will not enter the kingdom of God. They were given the right or the authority to choose to become a child of God, but they do not make the choice. Hence, 3 times, a perfect declaration, Yahweh said, I swear in my wrath, they will not choose to enter my rest. Thus, they may not no way enter therein. For a time, they are permitted to dwell in the Lord's household, just like Ishmael did with Isaac. But for them, the time is up. The time is now. Just because a person is part of the temple at large and offers up their sacrifices, remember the brazen altars in the court of the males, where according to the Codex, sacrifices would be the metaphorical equivalent of Christian service and sacrifice for God. And just because they worship God and go through all the rituals and traditions, it does not mean they are the chosen of God, much less the chosen of the chosen. Matthew 15, 7-9. You hypocrites, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Accordingly, many have been called, but few chosen. Many may look the part of a child of God, act the part, talk the part, and from the outside we might never know any better. But Jesus sees within. He knows those who are truly his, those who are now worshiping in the sanctuary, and those who are not. In this measurement and non-measurement, the called and chosen and faithful are distinguished from one another. The called and chosen and faithful are measured off as belonging exclusively to Yahweh. The called are not. Again, this non-measurement includes the chosen who are not now worshiping in the sanctuary. Those who truly belong to Jesus are priests unto God. They are in the sanctuary, and they are even now found worshiping. But so many others stay busy exercising their religion, trying extremely hard all their lives to be good for God, to be good Christians, all the while trying so hard not to sin. They battle sin with earnest intent, believing they have their golden ticket to heaven safely tucked away in their back pocket, simply because they said the sinner's prayer, or because they have worked so hard to be a good Christian and to honor Jesus. We already saw examples of this in the letters to the churches of Ephesus and Sardis, 2 extremely well-intentioned advocates for the gospel, which Jesus acknowledged but did not recognize. In fact, their so-called good works were flat out rejected as not being rooted in agape love and not having been performed before the face of the Father. In the letter to Ephesus, despite their adherence to truth and their vehement fight against those who were false, Jesus said they had fallen. They had apostatized from their faith. They knew all about the truth, but they did not know the one who is truth, the one who is agape love. What was said about them was eerily similar to what was said to those in the church of Galatia. They had fallen from grace and had been cut off from Christ. In the letter to Sardis, we discovered that the church had a great reputation for being alive, which means that from their own perspective and the perspective of outsiders, the community and other believers, this church was kicking it spiritually and was a great example of Christianity within their community. Jesus, however, thought differently about them, and he dropped on them a huge, unsuspecting bomb that was intended to obliterate their religious pride. Jesus said that despite their reputation, the truth is that they were dead and dying. Their works were not complete because they were not derived from him, and they were not performed before the face of the Father. They were doing their own works based on what they thought God wanted from them, and they did it all in Jesus' name. Their works were not a result of God living in and through them. We must never forget the source matters. The source is everything. Jesus warned them that if they did not turn to him and go back and believe what they did at first, essentially that all things must be by grace through faith, and that faith is a now thing, that he will come upon them suddenly as unexpected as a thief. And this was tied to a comment he will make later in Revelation 16:15, when he is describing the battle of Armageddon and those who must endure this terrible event. In other words, they will be those who are left behind. This was more than a warning. It was a threat. They would not be taken up in the rapture. They would be those who are not measured off unto God. And although they are those who are a part of the visible church, they do not belong to the true church of Jesus Christ, comprised of the sons who abide in unrestrained freedom and even now are worshiping in the sanctuary of God. Like a rod, the complete measurement. Let's not forget that the measurement was via a reed, like a rod. Though the measurement was that of flaccid humanity, it would be exacting and complete. In other words, the complete number of those who are now believing from both the Gentiles and the Jews will be measured, and the count will be accurate. There will not be one wanting from this calculation. The gathering will finally have been made complete. The time is up. The time is now. Let's stop here on this harrowing note and pick up on our next podcast with the statement that these outer courts that are not measured have been caused to be given to the collectives of the people, and they will tread the holy city for 42 months. To get a free download of the full written transcript with all the scripture references footnoted, please go to threshermediagroup.com. That is THRESHER mediagroup.com. This is Steve with Thresher Media Group. When you're ready to listen, tune in.